Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I think will we get going? Will we start, Kira or Deirdre? Is everything okay on your side?
Yeah, we're all good. Yeah, so
Perfect.
there's loads of people waiting to get going, so I can just let other people in as we go on, and it's recorded. So if people want to listen back, they can as well.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anya O'Connell. I'm part of the steering committee for Dairy Women Ireland. I have the privilege of introducing Joe Patton. Many of you might be familiar with him. For those of you who aren't, he's the head of dairy knowledge transfer in Teagasc. So it's an honour to have him join us and give us the time this evening to talk about dairy cow management over the winter period. So, with that, I will hand you over to Joe. We are happy to take questions via the chat option. And for those of you who'd like to ask the question live, if you just raise your hand, we'll get to it at the end. Yeah, over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Anya. Thank you. I never thought this day would come. You asked me you asked me about this months ago, and as usual, you say yes to things when they're far in the future. So I'll know for again. So okay, thanks for the invite, and hopefully we can get some information of use to you over the next while. Okay, so sure, look, I'll fire up whatever I have here, and we get going. Yeah, so where are we now? We're good, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look,
So do you want to put in slideshow option?
is that in slideshow there? No.
No.
Why does it never work? Oh, it's showing it is double screen. That's what it is. Yeah, 1 second.
Zo'n internet. Talk about the internet is this.
Hello.
No, it's not coming up with slideshow. Sure, look, just fire ahead, Joe. It's not
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll go ahead. We can fix it as we go. So anyway, look, yeah. So I suppose, yeah. Look, yeah. So yeah. So look, to cover this evening, guys. I suppose the issue is really is winter feed budgeting. Let's see now. Can you get that? Is that any better?
Hey, well done.
Yeah, sorry, it's just wrong. Two screens or maybe more. Right. So look, yeah. So winter feed budgeting is where I suppose we want to talk about. That's at the gross level, I suppose, Anya, as well as the and we get into the detail as well. And I suppose not only silage quantity, but silage quality as well, and mineral profiles around that. So really what we just want to sort of go through this evening is can we put people in a position where by the time we get to, you know, the 15th of April next year, that we have a well-fed and a healthy herd, and that our cash budgets and our feed budgets have stacked up, and that our vet bills are under control, and everyone is happy after a tough spring. I suppose that's where we really want to go. Okay, So look, before I say that on, I just take an opportunity though. I think it's just one little thing we need to talk about. And I'm only going to mention one thing to suit itself this evening. And I know you're doing it anyway, but it's something that we do need to promote, I suppose, when we're looking at, when we're looking at margins, we're coming into this time of year, and obviously feed cost and the cost of feed budgets is weighing heavy on overall cash flows and margins. Just to put the point in there, and we need to probably talk about this more into the future, I suppose. Maybe you've done a lot of it already, but certainly it's something that's been on our mind over the last 12 months or so, is the range in margins at farm level. And the range in margin is from, based on last year's our figures, the range is of an average of about 600 euros margin per cow. The range is from 40 euros to almost 1,200 euros. So per cow. So that's a huge range in farm income, and it has, real time effects, I suppose. So just to make the point that as we're coming into this part of the year, it's something that we need to get all farmers to sharpen on and really look at the financials. But I just said I'd throw that in there as an opening thing, because I think it's very important that we're all aware of where the range is. Whatever about the average, the range is what would scare us a bit. So look, and by way of background as well, I suppose, there's a lot of discussion this year and a lot of talk about feed shortages, and based on our figures from a budgeting point of view, I think good chunks of the country have made a lot of progress in getting to feed self-sufficiency for the winter period. There's still some areas where there are holes in the feed budget, I would say, but it's really been driven on growth rate and stocking rate as well. I think we're seeing this on high performing farms as well, that are losing a ton or a ton and a half dry matter of production this year. It is creating a requirement for for supplementary feed, and there's questions to be asked around that in terms of annual pasture growth. And just to draw your attention to it, when we look at where 11 tonnes grown gets us to from a whole farm stocking rate basis, it comes in at about 2.15 to 2.2 on a whole farm basis. In order to be carrying these stocking rates of 2.4 and over, we need to be growing over 14 tonnes of pasture, right? So I think it's an issue that we're facing. The growth rates are coming back and stocking rates are going up. So winter feed security, people are saying it's a weather effect. Of course it is, but look where the growth rates are at. And for a lot of farms, the annual trending growth rate is suggesting that stocking rates of over 2.2 are not going to be carried. So we have to address that. We have to address the winter feed problem as a grass production problem, really. That's just the point. So when we talk about winter feed and winter feed, it's really a consequence of annual pasture growth. And I think sometimes we don't link those two things enough together. The other quick point, just before we get into some more of the detail, really, is that when we look at spring calving systems, we speak an awful lot about winter feed being dry cow feed, I suppose, and that the supplements or the forage supplement that's fed to milk and stock is insignificant. But as we look across this, and it's just to put, without worrying too much about the numbers, I suppose our blueprint type system would have said that on a sort of a stocking rate of 2.5, which is beyond a lot lower than where a lot of people are at, we would say that there's about 1/3 of the annual feed budget is fed to milk and stock, or to productive stock. As stocking rates have gone up, and certainly where grass production is lower than the 14.5 tonnes, we are moving into situations now where close to or over half of our silage production is actually fed to milking cows, and that well over half of our silage, particularly at the lower growth rate levels, 2/3 to 3/4 of our winter feed production is being pushed to outside land blocks, and that is not coming in cheaply at all. Like, that is coming in at, like, when you add up where people are at in terms of the cost of that supplementary winter feed, the unit cost of that winter feed is probably as high, if not higher, than what we used to consider price for concentrate. So it's in the 250, 260 euros per ton of dry matter mark. So I just said we put that in a bit of context as we start, that, you know, when we could get stuck in here all evening to talk about you know, winter feed security and that kind of thing, but link it back to stocking rate and link it back to pasture production. That's very important that we make that point from the outset, because if we want to close the gap in profitability, we want to make it happen from a feed security point of view, it's really annualized pasture growth that's going to make that happen. And it worries me a little bit that the response to declining growth rates on a lot of farms in the short term is rent more outside land, and rent more outside land at fair money as well, probably. And if we continue on that path without addressing pasture production, we will end up with relatively low farm stocking rates on a whole farm basis, and also we'll end up with an expensive feed budget as well, I would say. So just to bear that in mind, right? Look, this stuff here is pretty basic, so I don't want to be spending too much time on it, and I'm sure everybody on the call is well fit to and has done plenty of feed budgets before. Winter feed budgeting is relatively straightforward, I would say. And we just need to do it, I suppose. And we talk about this a lot. And we surveyed about 600 client farmers for the fodder survey back a couple of months ago at this stage for their winter feed position. And of the farms of those 600 that we surveyed, about a quarter of them had done a winter feed budget in their own right. And, you know, there was probably at least 35% of farms well short on silage. They knew they were well short on silage, but they hadn't written it down or they hadn't budgeted it out. So I think, you know, to simplify it, you know, we get stuck into number of months and calculating and all the rest of it. I think the simplest way is just take it at kind of 8 tons per cow and about 4 tons per young stock unit in fresh weight terms. And if even if that figure as a starting point, we've made some progress, because it's better than worrying too much on the detail, I suppose. But if you think you're very, very short, we can get stuck into the detail in to a greater extent. But more or less, if you're looking at that 5-month winter plus a bit of reserve, in and around an 8 tons of silage is where it's at. And just looking at the figures in Moore Park this week on your Murray study, on the Clover study, where growth rates have dropped back a little bit, Anya's figures from her feed budget for the total winter feed is about 1.5 tons dry matter. So, you know, that's not that far off the 8 ton mark roughly in fresh weight terms, which is a fair chunk of change, and that has to be filled up. You know, obviously that has to be filled. And then simply to translate then on the other side, I suppose if you're taking bales as about, you know, 900 kilos or 0.9 of a ton, roughly for each bale. So 100 bales being 90 ton of silage, fairly simple. And then on the pit silage side, roughly speaking, dividing by 1.35 will give you, that's in meters, length by breadth by height, divided by 1.35. Now look, we'll obviously share the slides, guys, so there's no need to be jotting too much of this down, and it's all available on the web anyway. So I think just simple idea. Someday, if it's not done already, quantify the difference, quantify what the difference is, and look at, if you count it up in fresh weight terms, it's going to cost something in the region of 50 euros per ton fresh weight, in silage terms to fill that gap, or about 225, 230 euros a ton dry matter. So it can be, we would estimate that there's, for your standard sort of 100 cow scale farm, there could be a feed bill gap of somewhere between 10 to 12,000 euros for the people in bigger trouble. So it's a bit of change that has to be come up with in the meantime. So that's the point on that, I suppose. The other issue then, or the other option for any that's on pasture base, there's a nice bit of work done on that at the moment, where you can just enter the number of animals. So an example here on screen is just 200 cows, assuming that they're eating about 12 kilos dry matter a day. So I wouldn't worry too much on the detail. If you get that in and around 12 kilos per day, which is just you know, 2.2% of body weight for that smaller type cow, I suppose, or that medium-sized cow. Working out that your total requirements in dry matter terms now is about 2.5 tons per day. And on this particular farm was two pits of silage and 300 bales. And they've got about 600 tons of dry matter in stock, which has given them about 190 days of feed. The program will do all that simple calculations on your behalf. But look, that's not a bad place to be in. That's 6 months feed, I suppose, 180, 190 days feed in the yard. It's comfortable enough, you would say, in that particular case. So the options are do it by hand or do it through pasture base, which is, as I say, look, a figure to start with is where we need to get more people to go, and it probably will prompt an option at that point. Okay. And we can include these as well, but look at, again, maybe too much detail on them. But just remember, look, when we're talking about fresh weight versus dry matter, we just need to be careful that we're translating across the line. So as you can see here with grass silage, you know, wetter grass silage will obviously be heavier. So that's 750 kilos of silage per cubic meter, so by per meter cubed. It's 750 kilos of fresh weight, but it's about 160 kilos dry matter, whereas your drier silages will obviously weigh lighter on a fresh weight basis because of the water, but you'll get an extra, you know, you could have an extra 15 to 20% feed in real terms in the silage. So drier silages on average will give a bit better value, I would say, if you're out buying something. Okay, and we come to the relative value feeds in a second. Again, look at, those are just bulk densities, and it's worth making the point, I suppose, as we look at them, that, you know, obviously drier feeds will often give you better value per ton. So it's difficult to go out and buy good quality silage, as we know, and some people are maybe moving towards palm kernel or hulls or something like that. As an option, at least you know what you're buying at that stage. And for someone who's 15% short, restricting silage plus some straights might just be as good an option as buying silage of dubious quality at best, I would say, in a lot of cases. Okay, so look, relative value of feeds then is just looking at, you know, what is the value relative to barley and soya. So taking barley at 240 and soya at 500 for the moment, what is the relative value of the different feeds? And if you just Google Teagasc relative value feeds, you can, if you've got spot prices for barley and soya, you can do your calculations on that basis. Just bang them in and it will give you the figure. So just as an example, if that's where we are currently, hulls is worth about 240 euros. Palm kernel is probably worth about 235. It's not listed there, but it's about 235. So if hulls is worth 240 and you can buy it for 220, it represents value. If it's retailing at 290, it doesn't represent value. These are the values of the feeds, I suppose, rather than the costs of them. So kind of what we're seeing at the moment maybe is, well, maize prices coming down, but something like beet pulp tends to be good quality, but possibly a little bit overpriced if we're feeding dry cows. So something like hulls and gluten, you know, 3 kilos of that on a fresh weight basis with restricted silage will do a lot, if it started early enough, right? So just to put it in context, that's kind of where the spot prices are looking for those options, right? I'm taking as read, I suppose, that we've already discussed and we've probably looked at the idea of culling unproductive stock at the moment, so that, you know, if there's empty stock or high cell count stock on the farm at the moment, or surplus animals in any way, if they're not contributing, you know, they're not contributing to the bulk tank like they should, or they're very high cell count, or they're intended for culling anyway, the advice would be at this stage of the year to ship them on rather than spending heavily on purchase. I know milk prices come up and there's a sum to be done there, but certainly anything that's heading under sort of 0.9 of a kilo of solids, or maybe something in the region of 11 kilos of milk in real terms, they're starting to get to the point where it's marginal enough to be buying for them. So look, strip out the demand a little bit would be the advice before, you know, keeping on animals that are causing the need to go out and buy feed. Okay. Just on the silage side of things as well, where is that at? Reasonable quality silage is worth about 40 euros per ton. I suppose beet, fodder beet is probably worth somewhere around 45 to 50 quid a ton. Maize silage is probably worth something in the region of 60 to 65 euros for decent quality. That's where it's at. And then anything more than that is probably, it's getting on the high side. Okay. So feed prices down relative to this time last year, I suppose, which is a positive, but still ask yourself what type of animals are is the feed being bought for. Okay. So look, is there any questions at this point, or any clarifications needed maybe, and we can take them at this point? Because it's worth just, we just take that section and deal with it now maybe, and or any clarifications on it? Are we happy?
So, well, I have so this relative value of feeds table, is that available to us online, or is?
Yeah, just Google, if you just go Teagasc relative value of feeds, just Google that, it'll bring you to a page and it'll ask you for a high protein diet. And it'll ask you, so the way that works is we just value the feeds relative to barley and soya. So barley is your energy source and soya is your protein source. So if we were just using 240 and 500 is what we got as spot prices at the moment. And everything then is kind of valued relative to that. So you can see, look, wheat will always be 5 or 6 euros more valuable than barley, but you won't be feeding that to cows anyway, probably. It's just worked out their energy and protein value. So Hull's citrus pulp is worth about 225 in relative terms. So the way to read that table is, look, if you're looking at Hull's at 240 and it's available to buy at 215, it represents value. Okay. Whereas if Hull's is trading at 290, it's probably not as good a value. Now you'd have to take your spot price for barley and soya for that. It just gives us a way of comparing the feeds on an energy and protein basis, right? So in my view, anyway, if we're feeding dry cows, if you're trying to fill a gap of a couple or 3 kilos of dry matter per day, it's probably something like Hull's and gluten or something as simple as that. You don't need to be fancy if you're just feeding dry cows, really. Hulls and gluten plus reasonable silage will go a long way, I would say.
And just to reiterate, Joe, you said it and you said it wasn't on the table, but I missed the price. The palm kernel, what is the relative value of that?
It's worth, yeah, it's probably worth something in the region of, it's worth around 230 or in around that, 230 in around 230, I suppose. 235 maybe.
So if you can get it for less than 230, well and good. And if it's a
I would think so. So the question becomes then, I suppose we shouldn't be pushing the use of palm kernel, and we're not, but I'm saying it's up to every individual what they want to do as far as that goes. But the question is, do you buy silage at 55 euros a ton, or do you buy palm kernel for that money? If you're getting the palm kernel for that money, it represents value. And if you're filling up a gap of 3 kilos, which is 20% of your diet, really. If you're 20% short on feed, restricted silage plus something like that would be acceptable, But we'll come to it in a second. The big problem, I think, Anya, when we talk about using meal and silage to fill the gap, oftentimes what we end up doing is not restricting silage. We end up feeding the meal anyway, and we end up with over-conditioned cows, and we still run short silage. It can be awkward and it can be difficult in some yards. It can be difficult in some yards to make the saving on silage if we're talking about measuring out what they're eating every day, because they won't restrict their own intake. It's like it just won't. It's like a share size arrow for them, basically. When you start feeding gluten. Sorry. So look, so I suppose we just need to be conscious of that, because the last thing I think we need to be doing is putting together diets that require lots of labor and people running around with buckets of this and buckets of that over the winter. December is supposed to be downtime, so we don't want to be running into very complicated diets at that point. Okay, so look, if there's a couple of quid in the difference and it means you can buy silage and throw it in front of them, you probably will do that just to save yourself the hassle of feeding out, depending on how you're set up. That's what I would say. Okay,
super.
Are we happy enough?
I don't see any chats or raised hands. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, and look, just to reiterate the point, if you've got 7 or 8 cows there that have a cell count of 800,000 or something, and they're running on 3 spins, and you don't intend keeping them next year, don't be going out buying a pile of feeds to keep them on the farm for an extra 6 or 8 weeks. Possibly better to move them. And at the moment, beef price is reasonable. You know, just make it simple. You'd be surprised what you'd save by stripping it down. And I don't know where we're at with, as a group, where we're at with winter feed situation. Maybe there's some people short, and maybe there isn't. But look, the advice is simple: do a budget, and don't overcomplicate the budget, and fill it the most cost-effective and labor-effective way possible. Kind of simple. Okay. Right. Look, and we just look forward now. You know, we just look forward to the dry cow nutrition thing. And it's something we've talked about a lot with groups and that over the last number of years. It's a decent topic. And really, what are we trying to do here? We're just trying to do something simple that we get out the far side without major problems, right? And as we all know, the pressure comes on from an animal health point of view, from a labour point of view. You know, the calving period is when you get 70% probably of your clinical disorders. You'll get most of your problems in that period when you're already busy at something else. So can we just do something simple to sort of manage the dry cow diet, just to reduce some problems at calving down? And when we've seen this in the past, when particularly on yards where maybe feed is short, we can end up with niggly problems, you know. So we just have to watch for that. Look, and really, what are we trying to avoid? That's a very ugly chart, but the big thing here to remember is all we're really trying to do here is make sure we keep calcium status, right? We're not going to go into too much detail here, but you can see all I wanted to show is that clinical milk fevers, you get a big drop at the point of calving. They will recover after a couple of days, but that drop, or that 2-day issue, that's a downer cow, or it's a cow that's going to have mastitis. It's a cow that's going to have a displaced abomasum. It's cows that are going to have other, you know, more difficult problems in the next 3 weeks. So just one thing to remember, even in animals that don't show clinical signs, there is some bit of a risk of reduced blood. There is going to be reduced blood calcium on the point of calving. So our advice, based on that and looking at the success of it in farms over the last number of years, managing the transition out of the colostrum group is important for this reason, right? So keep just a bit of TLC until the 7th milking is what we're saying. And why is that? It's because health status and immune status and just physical status of the animal is going to always be compromised for them a couple of days. So run a colostrum group is the advice. Keep them together, take the pressure off them. Probably, you know, certainly for the older cows, you're probably going to see them out of that colostrum group before you turn into the main bunch. And set up the yard and do something around that. Have that extra bunch, or have a way of keeping those together. It will simplify milking as well. It keeps all your tape cows together, let's say, and it just makes the whole thing a bit simpler. So, you know, everyone will have their own way of doing that. Maybe different color tapes or whatever to signify days of the week or whatever it might be. But just the advice would be manage slightly differently. That, you know, your colostrum cows or your immediate transition cows, very fresh, are kept separate to the main group for at least up till they go back in the tank. Then it probably will improve your health outcomes. It probably will improve your health outcomes for mastitis and a whole lot of reasons, right? And it's really down to calcium status. So what we want to just talk about now is what are the things that will affect calcium status on the farm. So practical stuff we need to check. And the risk factors, without getting into huge detail, but I'm sure we can tick these off in our minds. And this is really just something we could plan as we're ordering dry cow mineral and doing things. It's a good time of the year now to think about and talk about this, because we'll be making some forward plans. So the first practical thing I would say is, can we plan to configure the yard in such a way that we can keep a colostrum mob together, and that we can let the main milking herds go to pasture as quick as possible after that. So that's what we would be saying. The things that will cause risk pre-calving or around calving for milk fever, they're very simple. These are the stuff we've come across over the years on farms. The first one is magnesium. You know, the magnesium levels in minerals being too low. That is a combination of either not enough mineral in the spec or not enough mineral being fed. okay? And particularly from March onwards, we do see where the dry cow mineral sort of isn't adjusted or slows down a little bit too much. So have we fed enough magnesium? Phosphorus being too low is another one, more so too low than too high, but we do see issues of phosphorus being issue on some farms, particularly where we have these repeat downer cows. Sometimes it's a phosphorus issue. Not enough vitamin D. You can see that particularly if we are feeding very wet or very late cut silage. So any of you that are relying on third cut silage to fill up a feed gap, feed your third cut silage at the start of the dry period, not at the end, because at the end there'd be a higher risk of lower vitamin D and poorer quality. So whatever you're going to do to feed your worst quality feed it earlier in the dry period rather than later. Okay. High potash in silage is another one, and it's a big one. So our potassium levels become a risk when they're over 2.3%. We'll see what that looks like in a minute. And certainly when they're up 2.7, 2.8%, that type of silage shouldn't be fed to dry cows. The good news is, I suppose, that for most farms, second cut silage or dry stemmy silage doesn't tend to be too high in potash, but we've often seen it on farms on where people are doing all sorts of stuff, boluses and injections and all sorts of things to try and solve metabolic problems. And then they just change to stemmy or bale silage and the problem was away in the space of 2 or 3 days. Okay. So if you have a real problem and there's downer cows and cows holding on, retained placentas, anything that looks like retained placentas, slow calvings, downer cows in particular, you have to ask the question about potash content in silage. Do you need to test it? If you do, send a sample away. But in the meantime, switch to something that's drier and stemmier, or include some hay, or include something for a few days pre-calving. We're not talking here about having to feed high potash silage for the entire dry period. It's really only for 4 or 5 days pre-calving. Okay, so retain a stash of that type of silage to make sure we can do that. The other couple of issues then that we see as problems: over-conditioned cows at calving, big issue on some farms, and will be an issue where people are using concentrate to stretch silage if they don't restrict the silage. Okay, the overfat cows at calving causes a major problem. And of course, I had an incident with one of our own college farms, or a problem with one of our own college farms there for a couple of years. They were always complaining about milk fever, and we tried over the phone to diagnose the problem, which was my mistake. And I happened to be down by accident someday in early February last year, and we went in and looked at the dry cows, and the problem was just clear: completely over conditioned, far too heavily done, too much concentrate fed pre-calving. That was the issue. You know, that's a big problem. And in that situation, you're into boluses and bottles to solve a problem, which we should be trying to avoid. And look, at parity, obviously, forward calvers and over are an issue, and there's no doubt about it. But Jersey genetics, crossbred cows tend to be higher risk. Not, you know, but that's just the reality. We just have to deal with that. So we just have to be a bit more careful around all the other points, you know. So your classic problem is a fifth calf crossbred cow in good condition with lots of milk potential, well sprung, possibly eating high K silage and not enough mineral in. That's time bomb, right? So we have to do the opposite of everything that's on this slide. Okay, so go through it, sit down, go through with the team on the farm, and do any of those points apply? Has any of those points applied last year? If there are, what can we do over December, January into February? What can we do to reduce the risks?
And Joe, what kind of a prevalence, obviously every herd will get 1 or 2 cases of milk fever, but what kind of a prevalence are you looking at it where it's a problem, like a big problem?
I think, look at 5% or so, 5% is a problem. And I think when we start seeing it in the first cow's calf and not the last ones on you, we really have a problem.
Okay.
Right. And the other thing to just make the point as well, I'm sure you've all heard this before, but just in case there's anyone that hasn't, if you see something like lots of retained placenta, so for argument's sake, right, let's say we're going to use 100 cows all evening because it's just easy, right? So 100 cows to calf, and then the first 6 cows to calf, 3 of them have retained placentas, and some of them has a slow calf. That's often caused by subclinical milk fever problem. right? So if you're seeing niggly problems at the very start, we're thinking, okay, I need to check my silage. In the meantime, I probably need to feed something dry and stemmy. I probably need to add in extra magnesium, or at least make sure that the dry chem mineral is measured out and given in time. I suppose where we don't want to get to is a point where every cow is getting a bottle or every cow is getting a bolus. Like, we should be able to control most of the issues without having to do that. Now, look, if you're into a 7th lactation crossbred cow that's calving in April and has a little bit over conditioned from a long dry period, by all means, you're going to put a bolus into those animals. So a protocol around that is useful. So maybe 4 calvers and higher, and they're warmed up too much, probably a bolus on the point of calving. I prefer a bolus than a bottle, to be honest. I think it's probably better. And boluses with vitamin D included. Probably that's what our vets are saying, and I think they're probably right about that from what we see. But get on top of it is the point, I suppose. Look,
so you're after hitting a nerve anyway, Joe, of some sort, because there's questions flying in on this rapidly.
We're getting flashbacks away from last week.
Yeah. So does regular silage analysis measure mineral content, or do you need to request it?
You need to request it.
That's
regular silage analysis is the most unimpressive thing you'll ever see. You send off your sample, they'll scan it in an NIR scanner. The sample is tested inside, 30 seconds. That can give you energy, protein, DMD, protein, fiber, all the rest of it. It's more of a wet chemistry job to get your mineral tested.
Okay.
I'm not telling people. I think, look, if there's no issues on the farm and you're happy enough that you're getting through, why go looking for a problem, I suppose. But if you know there's been niggly problems, it's well worth this time of the year is get some silage analysis on the mineral side done. Now, just to be clear on it, we need to emphasize this again. If we have a situation where we have, for argument's sake, for our 100 cows, we have our 800 tons of silage in the yard, and it comes back as high K from the pit, not a huge problem, because you only need to be feeding lower K silage for a week before calving, right? So generally in the calving pen, you're going to feed something that's a bit drier and stemmier or something like that. And if that's very stemmy and you have to feed it with a bit of soy or something along with it to make up the difference, by all means. But we're not saying here that the cows have to be on low K silage for the entire dry period. It's just that window.
Yeah.
And once you do that, it's amazing the difference it can make, So look at, and I do think, the prevalence and the incidence is something that's of interest to us. I know there was a researcher I know in Moorpark had done some work on this in the last 2 years. It's probably underreported, I would say. The issues of metabolic problems on farms are probably underreported, and people sort of put up with it or deal with it a bit, but we can get out ahead of it a little bit too. And we're not talking about too much magic here, just good minerals and the right silage and watch the condition. That's kind of it,
Yeah. Right,
Okay.
next question. Would a liquid feed be a good idea in the first few days of lactation? And if so, how much would you need to give them?
A liquid feed?
Yeah.
There should be no need for it. There should be no need for it. I think, look, at clean water, warm water, plenty of space. Now, clean water on the point of calving, but then lots of space and a good quality diet up front. I think body condition covers a lot of that.
So, yeah, right.
And
then that leads us on to the next question, because there's loads of questions, Joe, so we'll fly through.
Right.
What point is
slide 4?
What point is too much condition? What body condition score do you recommend for a fit cow?
A little less than you think, probably, is probably where I'd go, right?
Okay.
We'll come to it now in a wee second, but yeah, look, on the liquid feed thing, the problem is sometimes we get into these things and we end up putting an extra 10 or 15 euros a cow of cost into the system. And we are kind of worried about this, actually. We can see now that the range in veterinary cost per cow, it's averaging about 80 euros a cow, 85 euros a cow now, roughly. And the best way to measure veterinary cost is on a per cow basis, not anything else. But on a per cow basis, it's averaging 85. But we've some people spending 120, 125 euros per cow on veterinary. And I think, to be fair to anyone that has problems or storms of issues like that in the spring, we end up throwing as much stuff as we can at it to fix the problem. And is it necessary? I think if cows calve down at 3.25, they've got really good magnesium status, they're covered for their vitamin D and their phosphorus levels, and you put them on, you give them plenty of space and plenty of water and no bullying. Most cows should get back on their feet very, very easily. And I think the colostrum group is important.
And then, so on that colostrum mob, so you're saying the special TLC is more space,
Yeah.
more access to feed.
And keep them back from the main mob, keep them back from keep them back from grass for a couple of days, because the reason for that is purely, and I know people say, oh, we want to get our days at grass. Absolutely, get your days at grass. But when we say the cows go into the main grazing bunch, they should be out grazing every day after that, right? A day, like if you think about it, it's the first day and the second day after calving, a cow is going to eat maybe 5-6 kilograms dry matter of grass at most. It's not a big percentage of the annual diet to get out for those extra days. But what you do is you get your calcium status back in shape. So extra, just keep them. And the reason for that is, look, when you go to grass, spring grass will be very high in potassium. It's going to be 3% plus in potassium. You can see when you calve cows outdoors, it's a risk. You're changing the balance in the cow while she's trying to settle down metabolically. Leave it for a day or two and let them off. Now, look, young heifers, first calvers, not going to be a major problem, first or second calvers, but your older animals, give them their chance. And it's just easier to put the protocol in place, right? Just put the protocol in place, keep them together as well. From a milking perspective, you keep all your fresh cows and you can bury or dip them as a group. You can do all these things. You can catch the milk separately, do all that, milk them last. There's a lot to be said for it,
And then 2 more questions. Reviva in 20 litres of warm water for cows, heifers at the point of calving. What are your thoughts? And then milk fever now, towards the end of lactation, with the lush low mg magnesium grass, as we progress into the drying off period, will it have any impact?
It'd be somewhat unusual, but you do hear some cases of it. That's less of an issue, obviously, coming to it's obviously an issue, but I suppose your mag levels, so making sure that your mag levels are correct, so that you are getting in, you're getting the required magnesium should help really control that at this point. And at this stage, most people are going to be they're probably on 3 kilos concentrate at this stage, and should be at this point in the year, 3 to 4 kilos possibly. The mag levels should really help to cover that, I would say, because magnesium is one of the big things from both tetany and a milk fever perspective. We should nearly control tetany and milk fever are controlled quite similarly. The Reviva thing, do it if you want, but it shouldn't be. It's not. It shouldn't be necessary, to be honest. It shouldn't be necessary. Look, to me, when we get in there, we're into situations where we're looking at small bit gains. It's the bigger stuff behind that, right? Body condition, magnesium, phosphorus, those are the things that will make the main difference. Like I see herds with really good health status that don't use any product like that, and then we see people with very poor health status. They're addicted to products like that. It's practice-based solutions we need, not product-based, I would say.
Now, slide 5, Joe.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry, look, we'll pick up the pace. Optimal is 3.25, not 3.5, particularly as cows get older. What does 3.5 mean or 3.25 mean? Kind of irrelevant if we don't look at a cow, right? So this is God rest her, she was a good one, right? This cow, that's kind of where 3.25 looks, right? And just to be, what are we saying? That cow could do a little bit more, but not much more. And what are we saying? Short ribs have some cover. Rib cage is covered in. The top line is pretty much filled in. You have some bit of cover coming on the short ribs, and the tail head has cover, but it's not filled in. When you get to the point where the tail head is filling or filled in, and we have essentially rolls of fat here, we've overdone it. Okay, so the suggestion is sort of from late December onwards, or from once a week, maybe as the cows are pushed up, as the silage is pushed up, or as the feed is pushed up to the cows, we take a walk down the back of the whole bunch and just keep an eye and see, have we got very thin ones? Have we got one, or as a bunch, are they getting too are they getting too much to eat, basically, right? Very high quality silage will fatten the cow. We can limit feed that. We don't have to mix it with straw for the cows to be content. Like we've done the trials in Moore Park over the years, looking at, you know, let's say very high quality silage, and the cows are finished, and the barriers are, if you assume we've enough feed space, the barriers are clean by the morning, and you leave them for an extra hour or so when you allocate it out. Are they any different than cows that are eating lower quality silage over the course of a whole day, or if you're mixing straw through it? Not really. They just sort of get used to it, and it's not a problem. Now, we are meeting their energy requirements and their protein requirements, but I suppose we just want to be careful with high quality silage that we're not just packing the barrier every 3 or 4 days and letting them eat 12, 13, 14 kilos dry matter instead of 11 or 12. Okay, so look, the points here, that's 3. I would rather have the cow calving in that condition than calving them too heavy. But the tail head to me is where we need to be looking. If that's starting to fill in too much, we need to just be careful. And obviously then, if there are some particularly thin cows, if they're going to be calving early, we probably need to do something with them. I would suggest that the easiest way for thin cows, I don't like to be going back to doing a lot of extra feeding of concentrate when cows are dry. And I know for most people in batch feeding situations, you know, it's really it can be very difficult to individually feed. So look at the easiest way, if you've got cows that are under conditioned, just give them an extra 3 weeks dry. It's the easiest thing to do. There might be 5-6% of the herd. Just give them an extra three weeks dry will make up the difference, and that's it. So that's something to be done. That's something to be done now, or looking at our sort of late January, early February calvers. If there's some of them in particularly poor condition, we're saying, okay, they're going to need, instead of 8 weeks dry, we're going to give them 11. So your decisions on dry off date can be also affected by their current body condition. Okay, but I think as a rule at the moment, I think cow condition is quite good on most farms. People are fairly happy. So it's the few individuals, that's all. Okay, but obviously April calvers, they've loads of time to be dry. If they're going to be milked on through and dry, they've loads of time to catch up. Not a big deal. Okay, so look, maybe we've mentioned it here. Yeah, so we've kind of said this already. Look, what we're really saying is UFLs is energy and protein is PDI or pro. So that really translates into kind of 11 kilos of reasonable quality silage, dry matter, and sort of 12% crude protein is roughly what we're talking about. And the biggest difference it can make, or the easiest way to tin and drying off, give them the extra 3 weeks. They'll do a lot in an extra 3 weeks. Is what we're saying. So that's just to simplify the feeding. Okay, and once we meet them targets, we're happy enough. And that's what this slide is showing, Anya. And I don't want to get into too much details, but for example, you know, a herd that's down to 6 kilos of silage, for example, and mixing some straw included, you're going to feed 3 kilos of maybe maize and distillers of concentrate along with that. So when you add up the energy and protein in your silage, your straw, and your concentrate, it comes to 8.5 units of energy and 860 of PDI. That diet is fine. A diet that has silage in it at 6 kilos, and again with a bit of soy in it, we're back to UFLs and PDIs being the same. That's fine. The point here is you can make up all the combinations you want. You can knock yourself out with different combinations, but as long as we meet the sort of 8.5 UFLs and getting up to that level of PDI, it's nutrients we need to feed, not ingredients. Okay, and it's quite straightforward. So, but look, for most people, if you're going to be feeding 2 to 3 kilos of straw, you're going to end up having to feed 2 to 3 kilos of concentrate to balance up the energy values. Right? That's as a rule of thumb. For every kilo of straw goes in, you're probably looking at a kilo of a mixture of hulls and gluten or something like that to make up the difference. Or silage and palm kernel would do something similar. Okay. But again, the first point, do your budget and then see what you're short, and then you can make up the diets whatever way you want after that. So energy and protein is what we're feeding. We're not feeding ingredients, we're feeding nutrients. Okay. So I think we've made this point already that cows will eat 2.5% of their body weight if you eat lots of high quality feed. So for example, your intake values or your quality, this is just silage quality basically. Intake values are low and poor quality. Cows will struggle to eat 9 kilos of intake. If the quality of silage is very high, they could eat 13.5, 14 kilos, right? So they won't limit themselves unless we limit them at the high level. So that's why if we get to sort of 68, 70 DMD silage at 12% protein, in and around that 68, 70 DMD silage for 8 weeks with cows dry in good condition, that will translate into about 11.5, 12 kilograms of dry matter intake. Spot on. So 68, 70 is where we need to be for our dry cows. Anything higher than that, we're into too good a quality. Anything lower than that, we may not gain the type of condition that we need to. So, a lot of suckler cows are fed on poor quality stuff because they can afford to lose the weight, whereas your dry cow, in a dairy sense, really can't. Okay. So just to be clear on that, that's our table. So like we looking here, for example, on our silage analysis, DMD 61, the chances are that cow is only going to eat maybe 9 kilos of intake. And at 9 kilos of intake, she's not going to eat enough energy to make up what she needs. Whereas, a silage at 72 DMD, the chances are the cow will eat more like 11.5, 12 kilos of intake. You're going to be in a much better position. So what are we really saying when we're looking at what we need for our dry cows? 11% protein, I suppose, or 11 to 12% protein, DMD of 68 to 70, and an intake value of something around 90 or thereabouts. That's a good dry cow feed. This stuff here, 61 DMD, probably too low. Though cows will lose weight on that feed, we'd end up having to probably supplement probably a kilo of barley and gluten or something like that as a rule. Are we happy enough in that, Anya? So like just, not all silages obviously are created equal. So test the damn thing and get some idea. And if it's coming in at 68, 70, you can feed it and it'll be fine. If it's coming in at 75, don't feed it to your dry cows. It's too good it's wasted on them. If it's coming in the low 60s, it'll just about hold condition, and the thin cows will need concentrate to bring them up. Okay. Average DMD in the country is about 66, 67. It's dry cow feed. It's always. Okay, look, again, we're ahead of ourselves here. We've made the point. Failure to restrict silage. So somebody who is short and they want to feed 3.5 kilos concentrate and they fail to restrict the silage, your cows are going to end up in condition score 4. You're not going to save in bales equivalents in 100 cows. You'll only save 15 or 17 bales in the winter. If you restrict your silage, you'll save 120 tons of silage. It's kind of obvious, but we need to make the point because in most cases, when people use meal to save silage, they're relying on the cow to substitute out, which they won't do. So keep it in mind if you're going down the meal and silage route, you're going to have a way of holding it back, which is not simple in a lot of yards. Okay, a couple of quick things just to keep it moving, guys. That this is just a bit of work done in the States, and it's looking at the blue line is feed meal before calving, and the red line is no meal before calving, and this is 0 is the day the cows calve, and this is their intake across that period. And really what we see is there was no benefit at all of feeding concentrate pre-calving. So we hear this all the time. We need to feed some concentrate for a week or 2 pre-calving to get the cows ready for meal. Cut it out. Don't be wasting your time, right? If silage quality is poor, and if protein is low, and if you test your colostrum and it's poor, you would probably be as well feed a little bit of soya, less than 0.5 kilo, on the point of calving. But are we getting any performance benefit or any milk yield or any intake benefit by feeding a couple of kilos pre-calving, assuming the silage quality is on target? We're not. It's a bit of it's not necessary. Loads of people swear by it, but I swear against it. Similar on protein, we make the point, if your silage quality is good and your colostrum quality is testing well, there's no major benefit of including extra soya. If you're in a situation where silage quality is poor, if you're feeding hay or straw or something like that, and you feel that the diet is lower than that 12.5%, you would feed less than half a kilo soya per cow for about 10 days before they calve. If colostrum quality is testing poor, as in under 22, oftentimes you see a big improvement on soya. So the main reason to feed soybean pre-calving is to improve colostrum quality. If you don't have an issue with colostrum quality, the benefit of it will be marginal enough. Okay, but it does work for poor quality colostrum. Now, any questions there on you? We'll stop there and take any issues or any queries. I'm trying to simplify this pre-calving nutrition for everyone, just the right silage and a bit of mineral. And
I feel like we're getting a whole module in nutrition, cow management in the space of an hour. Would soya increase the volume of colostrum?
It could if the diet is quite poor on energy and protein. It probably will, but you will see definitely, yeah. If you're struggling with colostrum quality, colostrum volume, yeah, it will. It'll help. It'll help.
Okay.
And just on that, like what we've tended to see in some cases in the past, where maybe lots of milk fever, and then somebody goes in and feeds very stemmy silage to solve the potassium problem. They leave the cows short on protein, so just be careful. But a bit of soya makes a massive difference. Yeah, it will do.
Okay, then the use of beef bulls like Blue Shirley's putting more pressure on cows and need more pre-calving? Question.
No, they probably don't, because like what we're talking about there is really is there's a fair degree of tolerance around those figures. So when we say 800 grams of PDI, that's well covered for fetal growth and for fetal growth in the last month, that would be well covered. Okay. Interesting, some of the work done in Grange by Mark McGee maybe 10 years ago now at this stage. They had cows that, and this is in a circular context, but it is instructive. They would have had cows that went from, some cows were fed to lose 40 kilos of live weight over the dry period, and some gained up to 30 kilos of live weight over the dry period. So really well fed and really underfed. The difference in birth weight of the calves was less than a kilo. So you don't get big calves by overfeeding pre-calving. You get big calves by the bulls you pick.
Okay. So
You get calving difficulty by having over-conditioned cows, and you get calving difficulty by having subclinical milk fever. So this big calves thing, like most of the reason for big calves is big bulls. And that's controllable. So I think it's important to say, like we see this all the time, oh, there's a big calf because I fed her too well. Probably not. It's amazing that is very, very interesting, because I mean, really differences in feeding standards and very little difference in the calf. So be careful on that one too. These shepherds, my God. Yeah.
So be careful who you pick. What % protein in dairy nuts should be fed at this time of year?
12.
Grand. And what about if their body condition score is low pre-calving? Would it be worth giving concentrate then?
Yeah. Yeah. But I would say that, just to be clear on this, right? When we're talking about this here, that's 13 days relative to calving. And what we're saying here, if you're going to be feeding concentrate pre-calving, do it for the reasons of body condition. Don't be doing it for the reasons of rumen condition. Okay. And you might say, oh, sure, what else would Moore Park say? But speaking to the lads in AFB on this, AFB have totally moved away from pre-calving. That's where their cows would be going on to 12 kilos of supplements in post-calving. They have moved away from this pre-calving thing. Okay. There's no need for it. Slow and steady after calving is more important than this other thing, right? So by all means, remember, as we said here, with this poor quality silage up top, the cows will not reach their, sorry, I'm sorry for jumping around there now, but I'm just trying to get back to where I was. Yeah, we need to reach these standards. We need to get 8.5 units of energy in, and we need to get this level of protein in at a minimum. If your silage doesn't meet that, then surely you would have to feed some concentrate. If the cows are thin at the moment, you could either give them an extra 3 weeks dry or feed them 2 kilos of barley and gluten, at least for a while after they go, you know, as dry cows. But the reason for that is driven on body condition. And the point again, just to make it, as long as the cow ends up in the right body condition, it doesn't really matter what combination of ingredients we used to get her there. Within reason, obviously, with minerals and all the rest of it, but it's not really pre-calving concentrate, to labour the point, is a body condition exercise, not a rumen condition exercise.
So then my own question. So then if milk price rising,
Yeah.
the price announcements today went up, is 3 weeks dry or the extra 2 weeks feeding, which is most profitable at current milk price
Probably
for those cows?
probably the extra, it's probably better to milk them on from an economics perspective. But if we want to guarantee in the short term, it's probably, you'll probably take the milk out of them, and that's what most people will do. But if we want to guarantee next year's milk production, the easiest and best way of doing it is to give the extra days dry. I think it'll pay off in the long run rather than taking a short-term decision.
So look after your future self. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Then, right, sales rep told us to feed 18% to drive on the milk. Is he correct?
He's wrong. Move on.
How often should cows be body condition scored during the dry period?
I would say, to me anyway, we come back in that 18 thing in a minute. Sorry, I'm having a long day.
You're a bit flippant.
Sorry. Apologies, I'll go back on that. So, you know, not be flippant by any means. Look, what I would say about body condition is there's no point in doing this big hoo-ha and running all the cows down with the crush in the dry period. Once a week or once every 10 days, as the silage is pushed in, it's the easiest time you can do it. Just walk up behind them and make an assessment. And it's not the number, it's that thing of looking, have we got decent cover on the short ribs? Are they beginning to get over conditioned, particularly in your dry cows in February, March, the tail end of the herd to calf? Keep an eye on them once a week and have a feel for where they're at, you know, because it's amazing the amount of farms you go into. When the dry period hits, management stops, right? So we have to get away from that. It's kind of a half an hour, 40 minutes every so often. Are we making sure that the mineral is disappearing at the rate it should be out of the sack? Are we making sure that the cows are clean? Are we making sure that the cubicles are done correctly? Are we making sure that the body condition is where it needs to be? And a big one, have we any lame cows knocking around in the shed that we haven't seen for a month? All them kind of things. So it's eyes open, and so when somebody's feeding, someone should be taking a walk around and making some decisions. I think that's better, and it's more feasible than deciding, oh, we're going to run the whole lot out for the sake of it. You know, so that's back on the 18 thing on it. Look, if there's grass by day going in, and we have grass by day and maybe silage starting to appear at night, it's going to be more like a 15% ration. But anyway, in my view, the worst concentrates fed are the cheap 18s, right? There's a reason for that. If you want to create a cheap ration at 18%, you include low energy, high protein ingredients. It may be the case that a 14% high energy nut is better for milk production than an 18% middle of the road thing. So why am I saying that? Sorry now, again, just not to annoy you, but maybe it's not, they're not even listed. When you look at protein, no, it's not even listed there, sorry, but something like maize gluten would be reasonable. But then you get things like sunflower, cotton, or something like that, or even palm kernel included. High protein, low energy. And
So should we be talking in the language of crude protein at all when we refer
no,
to
absolutely
what's that?
not.
UFL.
UFL and PDI. So like, I mean, it's dinosaur talk to be talking about 18% rations,
Okay.
frankly.
So the benchmarks for UFL and PDI as of the back end.
It would be, if you're looking on an as-fed basis, you're looking at something in the region of 0.94, 0.95, 0.94, I suppose, UFLs per kilo as fed, and
Yeah.
that would include the minerals. And then you're probably looking at 115, 120, 115, 120 on the PDI scale. But look at, I mean, I was talking to guys there lately, they're still doing 1.8, 1.9 of solids, up to 1.9 of solids, and they haven't fed anything other than a 12% ration all year.
Mm.
They're sitting at 4.5% protein at the moment, and they're doing 90 liters of milk, and they're doing it on a 12% ration. And then we've other people that are looking for the solution on an 18% ration, and they're paying an extra 20 quid a ton, and it's not going to do it for them. So we need to move on from that way of thinking, I reckon. And if we want to come back on that early lactation feed, we certainly can, but we probably don't have time to bury into it this evening. But look, the point is made.
Does Teagasc have you're saying today, like the benchmarks for that is 0.94 UFL and PDI 115, 120. Does that differ throughout the year depending on the season?
Not really. Like I mean, this thing of moving up and down on protein and all that. Look, there'll be some. Look, we'd be here all evening. We get into it, but like, look, the way I look at it is right. If you say, very simply, a three-way mix of, for argument's sake, beet pulp, distillers, and barley in a three-way mix plus the minerals and molasses, that is a 14% ration at 0.94, 0.95 UFL, right? Now, in the spring, if you want to make that into a 16% ration with silage in the diet, you've included soya at about 10% and taken out some of the distillers. So the only difference between 14 and 16 should be whether there's soya included or not, and at what level it's included. The problem is when we go for, cheap 18% rations, by definition, we're asking for lower grade ingredients in the lot of cases. Okay. And why 18? Like, where did that come out of?
Right, a few more
questions.
questions.
Forever. I think we've made the point. Yeah.
Right, just a few more, three more questions then. What are the main ingredients you recommend for a concentrate for a lactating cow if money is not an issue?
Beaches, right? If money is not an issue,
yeah,
that's a strange one. Money is always an issue. And the idea that, look, what are we saying here? Lactating cow ration, freshly calved cow, I'm assuming, the way we would look at that is 30% cereal, right? Balanced towards maize, probably, okay, 15% maize, 15% barley or thereabouts, bringing it in around 30%. Then you're looking at probably either distillers or rapeseed as an intermediate protein ingredient, probably distillers, soybean and beet pulp, plus your molasses and your minerals and a little bit of protected fat and a few other things, right? That's where it's at. That's going to come in at 0.96, 0.97 of UFL, and depending on whether it's a silage diet or a grass diet, by moving up and down the soya, you're going to be at, this time of the year, 15, 16%, or 18 if you're in a freshly calved situation. I suppose it's better to ask what should not be in there. Wheat feed, probably no more than about 5% palm kernel, probably keeping citrus out of it, really, to be honest. What else would you be in there? Some of the lower quality glutens, probably keeping those out. No cotton seeds, no sunflower.
Okay, and then they must be going for Bailey's cow or something. So then, do cows in a once-a-day herd need higher protein nuts if in good condition?
No.
Okay, no. And then
protein to try. I'm assuming the idea there is to try and milk more and keep conditions stripped off them a little bit. Won't be won't be a big deal at this stage of the year because protein, protein will always exceed. You won't be able to make the difference on if there's grass in the diet at all, they're always going to have excess PDI in the system. So it's not a big deal. Make the saving, I would say.
And then when feed quantity is a bit tight, please rank your priorities for what is most important for both the herd management and profitability.
When feed quantity is tight.
Okay, that's a long question. We might move on.
Yeah, it's a good question, but look at first
It's
thing
an
is
essay type question.
first, I know it's if feed quantity is tight. First thing we're doing is we are asking every animal in the place should it be there. That's the first question, and it's surprising. I was on a farm there 6 weeks ago. Relatively large scale herd. We pulled out 40 cows that shouldn't have been there. Now he was heading off to buy maize and buy a whole lot of things, so wouldn't be worth buying me feed for some of these cows. So that's the first thing. The next thing then, the priority is meet the energy and protein requirements and the fiber requirements. Meet the energy, protein, and fiber requirements of the animal in whatever combination that we can. Okay, and the focus should be on energy and the focus should be on energy and fiber first, and the protein is actually a fourth priority, not a first.
Okay. Right, I think what number slide are we on now, Joe?
6, right? No, we're okay. So look, I'm not going to kill this, right? But we'll just talk a little bit about minerals, right? And I'll just find something that, I'll find something. Look, we'll skip to here and we'll just talk from here, right? Sorry. All right. So, where we just want to talk about the mineral profile on feed for a second. And we mentioned it already about potassium and sulfur and Cab and all the rest of it. What are we looking for a dry cow mineral? Really, potassium level is the one that we need to be careful on. So I'm sorry, we just go back up here. These are our dry cow targets, right? So don't worry too much about the detail, but in theory, you'd like your potassium levels being under 1%. Never going to happen in the grass silage. 1.8 to 2% should be fine, right? Calcium is higher in most silages than we need, so you're looking at no added calcium, and phosphorus is tending to be a bit lower than we need, so you want phosphorus included. This is your grass silage average versus your target for the cow. Obviously, magnesium needs to go in, so look at this: no added calcium, phosphorus needs to go in, magnesium needs to go in. There is no K or no potassium being added to the diet. Our job there is to keep it as low as we can. Rather, obviously, we're not going to be adding potassium into the diet, and the sodium, it's going to be in there as salt anyway. It's not generally a big issue. So the point here is that if you're looking at this DCAD, and you'll see this written on some of the things, DCAD is just basically measuring the anions and the cations. So it's basically, I think I have it here, how much sodium and potassium versus how much chloride and sulfur. Simplifying that right down, the best, really what we're saying is best to limit feeds with high sodium or limit with high K on the pint of cab, right? So we also need to include plenty of magnesium. So this would be considered, this would be a typical mineral analysis from, I think this is an FBA one. Potassium is too high at 2.8%. Just to draw your attention though, it's in as green. If you looked at that without knowing the figure, you'd think it was on target. It's not on target for dry cows. That's in the normal range of samples, but not ideal for the dry cow. As potassium is too high, we see this CAB value or this DCAD value, CAB, DCAD being all the same thing. That's too high. I mean, that's up sort of over 200, 250. The risk of milk fever is increased. So if I was looking at that, I'm saying that's a high risk silage because it's got a very high potassium value, which is really driving this high CAB value. They're kind of one and the same thing. You could just focus on the K or the potassium, I suppose. A low risk silage by comparison would be down at 1.8% for the K, which is really leading to your CAB value or your DCAD value being low as well. So if you're feeding this type of silage along with a good mineral, we're laughing. We should be fine, assuming the body condition is good as well, right? So the potassium will interfere with your mineral absorption. So in a way, even if we have this type of silage, it's going to be very difficult to, if we just keep adding dry cow mineral on top of this, it will take a huge amount of dry cow mineral and it mightn't even work to counteract these figures. Much easier if we can just switch for a week or so before calving onto this type of stuff, right? That's the value or the power of analyzing the mineral content. So, you know, there's more to your mineral nutrition than just what's in the bag. Okay, so remember, potassium under 2.3%, we probably should be okay. 2.3 to 2.5, getting risky. Above that, too high for dry cows. Okay, so I think we just keep, in the interest of time, we just give you, that's a typical mineral spec of what I would say is where we need to be. Look at your dry cow mineral spec and say, okay, magnesium is added in at 20 to 24%, and there is some added phosphorus. We look at some examples in a second. And then you've got your trace minerals. So obviously these are going in grams per day. So sodium, magnesium, and phosphorus will be fed as grams per day. So 25 grams or 30 grams. Whereas your trace minerals like selenium, iodine, copper, cobalt, they are going in milligrams per day. So the cow only requires, you know, 5 milligrams of selenium. Still requires it, but it's tiny in terms of quantity. I suppose that the practical outcome of that is that these can be supplied as a bolus if you want. So, you know, 5 milligrams is tiny. 120 milligrams is tiny. You could bolus the cows for the trace minerals. However, you're talking 30 grams plus probably another 10, 40, 50. You could be up to 60 grams, 70 grams of material at least up at this level, even more. So remember, 120 grams feeding rate for minerals. The reason it's 100 or 120 grams is because of these macro minerals up here. And as we said a few minutes ago, these are the ones that will make the biggest difference to the success of your milk fever control. So long story short on it, you cannot bolus the cows to prevent milk fever. You cannot just use a bolus on its own to cover dry cow minerals. We've seen it so many times in the past. We talk to farmers and they say, oh, well, I bolus the cows for minerals and that's me done. If you do bolus the cows, you will still need to feed magnesium and phosphorus in the water or as CalMag or as dical phosphate or something, or sorry, straight phosphorus, I suppose. In a way, it's just easier to feed dust minerals. Okay, so I think we're hopefully clear on that. These are, you know, less than a thimbleful every day. These ones are, you know, big chunks. So we need to be careful that when people say, oh, well, I'm going to bolus the cows, it's not really going to work from a milk fever perspective. So look, I would suggest, and we can, obviously we share these, I would be saying, look, compare the total milligrams per day to what's on the bag and compare this to what's on the bag. And very simply, or very soon, reading the side of the mineral analysis becomes simple. Okay, so for example, I'll just run through a couple very quickly. Standard pre-calving, magnesium 15%. Straight away, not buying it. Okay, not interested. Want 20% plus. You know, €200 a ton, not the end of the world when you consider how much minerals a cow going to eat over the course of the dry period. She's going to eat 145, 50 kilograms, thereabouts. €200 will not go too far. You know, you'll save €1 per cow, and it's not going to be a major saving, and you won't be covered. If there are no issues and you're always feeding a 15% one, I'm not going to argue with anyone, but I'm saying for people that just probably want to hit the targets, too low. This one at 17%, again, probably too low. The only one I'm probably looking at to use here is 20% magnesium is hitting the target. There's 3% phosphorus in it. So look first at the mag, then you're looking at the vitamin D. Down here, vitamin D 50,000 compared to our target, you know, of 120,000 or 14,000 per day. Sorry, I should just make the point that this is what's in the bag. So and this is what the cow gets every day. So 42 milligrams per kilo in the bag, feeding it at 120 grams a day, cow gets 5 milligrams a day. So again, too low on the vitamin D, too low on the magnesium, move on. You're probably looking at this one here as what you would be going for. Again, here's one, obviously a bucket, as you can probably see from the photograph. Magnesium, 10% waste of time for a dry cow, for a dry dairy cow. Vitamin D, only 50,000 units per kilo. That should be twice that, or 2.5 times that. Wouldn't even be looking at any of the other ones. You just know straight away, not worth it. Here's one that we put together for a group a few years back in the Midlands, and it's working really, really well. Phosphorus 4%, magnesium 25%. The vitamin D is here at 30,000 units. You can't really overfeed the vitamin D at that point. It's, you know, it's really, really good at that level. And then you've got your iodine, cobalt, selenium, and all the rest of it. Not to have been into too much detail, but you could see for something like copper, people talk a bit about protected copper or not. You know, what do you mean by protected copper? There's different sources of copper. As you can see here, you've got copper sulfates, you've got copper chelates. So this is protected copper here. And that's your protected one. So the chelates would be your protected copper. Copper sulfate is your simple mineral copper. And you can see here, there's 300 milligrams of copper in the mix. Half of it's coming from a protected copper source. At this point, most good minerals will have half the mineral copper coming from a protected source. So sorry now, and similar with selenium. Sodium selenite is a mineral selenium. Organic selenium is giving you 40% of the total is coming from an organic source. So just to quickly compare, magnesium, too low. Calcium added, shouldn't be in there probably. Phosphorus, too low. No protected sources of any of the trace minerals, and only 50,000 units of vitamin D. I wouldn't take it for 500 quid at all. Whereas you're into something that's 25% mag, 4% phosphorus, loads of vitamin D, and a mix of protected and organic sources. Sorry, organic sources and mineral sources, I should say, for both your copper, your zinc, and your selenium. Take that mineral, take that example, compare it to what you're buying. If it meets or comes close to them targets, as long as you feed enough of that and your mineral K in the silage is not too high, you're laughing. Okay, so that's it. So I would prefer, in summary, to say, right, spend an extra 100 or a couple of hundred quid per ton, which is not a big cost across the whole herd. That'll do 200 cows, and feed something of high quality like that. Better to spend your money on that than spend it on post-calving products.
So on that, like, is there, like, what somebody's put in there, is there any regulation against pre-calver minerals, as you'd assume a standard mineral should be required to have the minimum requirement? So you're after putting up stuff there that could easily fool the non-educated person, as in me. So
yeah, and look, I have to say though, right, to be fair,
or is there a Teagasc resource there to go through all of the available minerals out there?
yeah, well, this one, like we would say as an example mineral, like this would be the standards here, right? That's your kind of Teagasc standard there, what the cow needs every day, right? Now, I don't want to get into too much detail on, but the copper, obviously, the level of copper allowable is limited by EU legislation. So the level of copper has come down, and that's maybe why a lot of minerals have gone to a 120 gram feeding rate. You cannot feed any more than 3,000 in the bag.
Okay.
So to get 360 in, you have to feed a bit more of it. That's how you get around it. But we shouldn't be overfeeding the minerals either. I think we've often seen it in the past where people are feeding 200 grams of mineral, ending up feeding too much phosphorus and causing problems. Feed a good quality mineral to the recommended level, right? That's your resource there. And again, you can share that out. And it's really a case of comparing, right? And again, not to get too worried about it, but once you hit the 20 to 24% mag, once you have sort of this high level of vitamin D, and once you see a mix of organic and inorganic sources of copper and zinc, you're into a reasonable quality mineral. So the standard mineral, again, look at here, copper is in as 3,300 milligrams per kilo. That's probably in as copper sulfate, no protected copper source in it. In the higher quality mineral, there's a protected copper source. If there is an issue of copper on the farm, that will help to solve it. If there's no issue of copper on the farm, you can argue that is it needed, right? So, but it's what people need for themselves. I wouldn't compromise on the vitamin D. I think that just will translate into better outcomes from a milk fever perspective. But I would have to say though that in most cases, most of the good mineral suppliers have moved a lot in the last number of years. The demand has been there to increase the magnesium levels, demand has been there to increase the vitamin D levels. They have responded to demands of groups and farmers by upping the spec a little bit. So you'd almost have to go looking for the bad spec, I would say, in a lot of cases. And most of the time that's linked to price, basically, because phosphorus and vitamin E, in particular vitamin D, will create the big difference in price. So I hope that demystify some of it a little bit. It's not that complicated. I know looking at the label, you're reading, going, Jesus, what is all this about? But and our advisors are the same, being blunt about it, because they look at it once a year and have to go, oh, geez, I can't remember what this is supposed to be, but that's what it's supposed to be. And that's it, really. That's the bottom line of it.
Okay.
Okay.
And then there's two more, I have a few more questions there. So, what is the break-even yield for a cow in litres between now and dry off? If below this, should we just dry off?
It's probably, with milk price coming up, it's probably somewhere around, depending on your solids percentages, it's probably going to be something around, in and around the 10 kilos of milk.
Okay. And if you have a split bin, is there any merit in having different nuts for when cows are out at grass versus in on silage?
Some merit in it can be difficult to manage, but yeah, there could be some merit in that. But in the springtime, like, we should be getting to the idea, and I know people think we're nuts saying this, but if you can put grass in the diet every day, it simplifies the concentrate very, very quickly. And I know people that say, well, that can't happen on, you know, whatever, but I would be selecting my concentrate spec on the assumption that the cows are going to grass every day. And on the days that the cows aren't going to grass, I'm not going to worry as much as people might think I should, because they're going to go out tomorrow.
Okay. And then I have my own question. So I was on my own farm today, right? And we're fattening cull cows that were put on once a day and housed in the early September and being fed 10 kilos of meal to finish. Would you do that, Joe?
Probably not. Probably take the milk out of them and feed them 6 or 7 kilos and get rid of them that way. Look, it's milk prices strong, like, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, milk prices are turning good, but it could be marginal enough, I would say. It could be marginal enough.
Marginal exercise.
Yeah.
Perfect. Is there any more questions out there, or does anybody want to ask their own question live as opposed through the chat box? No, and then right, if we'll wrap it up there because it's 9 o'clock on the button. Joe, do you want to just throw up my few slides there? I'm sure, Joe, you'd be willing to make your slides available to
No hassle.
us. Yeah. Perfect. So we can share them with you.
Yeah.
Just to remind everyone, Dairy Women Ireland is established for the last 3 years. We're an educational and support network, and we provide various forms of events throughout the year. This is just one such type. Tomorrow in Cork, there's a Dairy Innovation Day on Rostellan Farm between 2:30 and 4:30, open to everyone. The tour includes a visit to the shop, behind the scenes look at the milk vending business and to hear their farm inspiring stories. So if you're in the area or if you're knocking around, do make yourselves available to go to that event. And also we have our conference coming up. Our conference is our flagship conference. It's again, we sold out the last 2 years. This is our 3rd year in running. Charleville Park Hotel on November 23rd. Again, jam-packed day. We have a welcome dinner the night before for people who want to make a weekend out of it. And tickets for that can be bought on dairywomenireland.ie, so our newly launched website. So I encourage everyone to go to the website, book your tickets for that. Yeah, Joe, loads of thanks coming in for you. Everybody admires your passion for cows and feeding cows and your knowledge. So thank you for coming on board and coming on to talk to us this evening, taking time out of your evening. We really appreciate it. And sure, look, you're more than welcome to come to the conference as well, Joe.
See you there.
Good luck.
I'll make a weekend out of it. That's
True.
okay. Thanks very much, and thanks very much to the wider group. So it's a great interaction this evening. So thank you, everyone. Okay.
Thank you very
Super,
much, Joe.
great stuff.
Excellent.
Thanks, ladies. Thank you. Good luck.
Much.
Bye.